Okay, so why do I say that Skye, in his recent summary, got his assessment of witchcraft 100% wrong? Well, step one, he mentions the Bible's rejection of these many practices and immediately follows them by saying, because in the ancient world, as if witchcraft, necromancy, mediums, the occult practices, etc., were only a thing in the ancient world. This is his first thing that he gets very wrong, because occult practices are still very much a thing today. Whether we're talking about less developed countries where it might be more generally accepted and recognized even by believers, or maybe more publicly practiced and less thought of as fake. That's certainly a thing. This is not just in the ancient world, but even in America, witchcraft is a growing thing, and occult and pagan practices, people who claim to be pagan, are growing in number. Now, I say that somewhat anecdotally. I can't say that I know all of the numbers on this, but I've observed it over time. And I've observed it become more public. When Charlie Kirk was killed recently, I don't necessarily give I don't give any credit to this, but a group of witches came out online and said it was their doing, that their spells that they had cast on him were why he got shot and killed. And then they made a moral argument for why it was okay that they cursed somebody to death. These people, they're not just joking. They're not just idiots. They believe that what they are doing does all this. Okay, so this is modern people in modern America who are practicing witchcraft and occult practices. And of course, these are people not in the church, I would assume, and who take this occult very seriously. Now, there's another side of this in America where the cultural zeitgeist has made these things popular, and the dismissive attitude represented by people like Skye make it untenable to the modern mind to believe that there's any significance to it. So therefore, there's another side where in the church there are still people who practice some of these things, kind of just experimenting, not necessarily, they can't really be bad because they're not real, right? It's kind of like when Paul says, we know that an idol is nothing in this world, right? So if you eat food that's sacrificed to an idol, it doesn't matter. And in another place he says it's been sacrificed to demons. So which is it, right? It's that we know that that the idol is nothing. We know that a Ouija board is nothing. We're not afraid of Ouija boards like the world are when they're afraid to burn them, you know? We're not afraid of them. But we recognize that what people are using these things for is in communion with the demonic. And that's an unpopular thing for the modern mind, certainly the postmodern mind. But we are believers who believe in a supernatural realm with a God who lives outside of this realm, and a God who tells stories specifically of himself, Jesus, casting out demons. So we believe in an angelic and a demonic realm. We believe in a spirit world. And we believe that these things are not insignificant, right? Okay. So he gets all of that, he gets that wrong at the very beginning, just by casting this just in the light of an ancient problem. But the other thing he gets wrong is to just say that witchcraft is strictly the attempt to manipulate. And first he does a little bit better because he says the deities, right? And then he says, or to manipulate God. Now, I would bet if I dug into this really carefully in Scripture, which I have not done prior to recording this video, if I was to dig into this deeply in Scripture, I might find an incident or two where witchcraft is referring to the manipulation of Yahweh. But I would dare say that a mass majority of the time, it's not, right? That it's actually when the people turn from Yahweh to other sources of power, other sources of desire. And not just because of fear, as he pointed out, fear, and not just out of manipulation. You want to talk to grandpa. It's not because you want to manipulate, it's because you miss grandpa, or you want to hear what he has to say. Or you think it might just be fun to talk to grandpa. And yet it's still divination. Yet it's still witchcraft. Yet it's disobeying God, and it's seeking the help of other spirits instead of the spirit of the living God. So witchcraft has more to do with idol worship. It has more to do with participation with demons, as the New Testament calls it, than it does just with manipulation or fear. And so Christians practicing witchcraft, Christians playing with witchcraft, are crossing that line into idolatry. Now, I think Skye would come up with a different idea of idolatry, like spending too much time with your kids or liking your job too much. I hate that definition. That's a whole other talk. But idolatry in Scripture is primarily the entreatment of, the participation with false gods, be they demons or be they a piece of wood. And witchcraft is very much that. And it's very much a spiritual practice that is outside of the spiritual practice that God has set up. So Skye misses that entirely, which makes sense because that doesn't matter and has no context for us if you, like he, see witchcraft as being only an ancient world problem. And you don't, I guess, think of the thousands of witches or Wiccans or pagans in this world as actually practicing witchcraft, right? And it doesn't matter for the church because they have a God that loves them and that they can just trust. Then he gets it even worse. No, I think honestly that's the worst of it, but maybe he gets it worse. Then he starts to call out a bunch of Christian concepts as witchcraft. Well, he started out with completely the wrong definition of witchcraft to begin with. But he goes so far as call the prayer of Jabez witchcraft. Okay, I know he's talking about the movement in, I guess, the 90s, early 2000s. I have a vague memory of it, obviously not as much as him. But that movement, I can't speak for the movement, but there's a prayer in the Bible that comes from. And when you pray this and expect God to answer your prayer, that's not witchcraft, that's faith. God hasn't just asked us to trust him. There's this concept where people hate faith and they just want to trust God, but God has called us to partner with him and to partner with him in faith. That is to actively engage our trust and recognition of who he is, to actively engage our trust and recognition of what his plan is, to actively engage our trust and recognition of his promises and his purposes and his ways of dealing with us. That's faith, and without faith it's impossible to please God. So then when you ignore the actual witchcraft in the world and then start accusing Christians who are faithfully operating in faith, whether their theology is off or not, you start accusing them of witchcraft, man, you're so far off. And okay, this answer he gave was all in response to a question, a multifaceted question of what Christians should be allowed to participate in. Should they Harry Potter, Dungeons and Dragons, and then it goes as far as Ouija boards. Okay, honestly, that's a complex question that I don't want to answer in this video, but I think that deserves a thoughtful answer. And I liked Phil's answer better because he pointed out some of the reactionary items, reactionary ways that we've responded to these things. But it also doesn't mean that there's not an importance of being discerning in these things. I certainly think the Ouija board is a witchcraft item. It is meant for witchcraft. That's what it's for. That's what it is. I'll say that one, end of story. I think some of the others require a little more nuance in their answers. Ouija board is witchcraft. Don't play with it. But not being able to acknowledge the reality of witchcraft puts this in such a nonsense place that once again, we're talking about prayers from the Bible to God that God answered being witchcraft, instead of talking about trying to communicate with the dead being witchcraft. Let's get these things in order, Skye. completely wrong. Once again, not just an ancient problem, not just about manipulating, less about manipulating our God than about participation with false gods and idolatry, which is still a thing today. And once again, I'll just point out, I've seen this in the church. I've seen people who are participating in these things and people who really just honestly don't know any better, primarily because they miss an important part of a Christian worldview, a biblical worldview, which says that there is a spirit world, that there are things beyond the natural that are happening. And when we completely dismiss that with a naturalistic worldview instead of a biblical worldview, well, our conclusions are all going to come out wrong.